For the Life of the World is a production of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. For more information, visit faith.yale.edu.
Our visions of life in which we're invested have resources to actually be able to describe the good, not just of the game if we can win it, but of the game itself, of the discourse itself, of this shared project of democratic life together.
This is For the Life of the World, a podcast about seeking and living a life worthy of our humanity. I'm Evan Rosa with the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. In this episode, Matt Croasmun, Ryan McAnnally-Linz, and Miroslav Volf discuss the Trump-Biden presidential debate from earlier this week and its implications for public discourse and the very possibility of democratic deliberation. And yes, we know that that is not the headline anymore. The truth is stranger than fiction. Again. The fact is, lots of people are still sick. This pandemic is real. But we're not trying to keep up with the latest headlines. The purpose of every single episode of this podcast is to help you envision and pursue a life that is worthy of your humanity. And we think there's something important to say about what we saw, or maybe more appropriately, what we can't unsee in the presidential debate from earlier this week. Something deeply significant for what it means to share common life together and jointly pursue the fullest vision of flourishing we can imagine. On Tuesday, we saw the symptoms of a truly unhealthy public discourse. But we're not referring to the aggressiveness or the intensity. The conditions for debate assume that we contend, fiercely sometimes, for what we take to be right and true. But what makes this country's public discourse so sick, so fragile, is something that has infected it from within, something that threatens the very possibility of debate. Now, as I listened in on this conversation with Miroslav and Ryan and Matt, I found these 2 points to be foundational, and they both come from Miroslav's book, Flourishing: Why We Need Religion in a Globalized World. We have 2 basic responsibilities if we are contending for particular normative visions of flourishing in a democracy. That just means if you have a vision of the good life, if you think it's right. First, we need to commend our vision of flourishing life. We ought to defend it, and robustly. And second, we must help maintain the possibility of pluralistic discourse, disagreement, debate, deliberation. We need to defend discourse about the flourishing life. So, we uphold our views, we articulate them, we defend them, and extend them. But we encourage the dialogue. We listen carefully. We're intellectually hospitable. We're humble and open-minded. We're ready to learn as we defend our views. And if we're not prepared to maintain the possibility of public discourse, or indeed, if we imitate the very unpresidential behavior on display earlier this week, well, that's how you destroy a debate. Thank you for listening this week. After the episode, we'd be so grateful to hear your thoughts and review or rating over at Apple Podcasts. And if not us, tell a friend and share this with them. Here's Matt Croasmun kicking things off.
So Ryan, Miroslav, when I was watching the debate Tuesday night, it actually brought to mind something that Miroslav, you said in Flourishing about the responsibilities that various visions, world religions included, have in the public square. He said they have 2 responsibilities, both to, on the one hand, commend their visions of flourishing life, but also to contribute to the continued possibility of truth-seeking conversation about flourishing life. And as I was sort of processing that cacophonous debate, I found myself wondering, is Trumpism actually capable of the second of those tasks? Was Tuesday night evidence that his vision perhaps lacks the intellectual resources to play that second role of maintaining the public square? So Miroslav, I don't know, it'd be helpful maybe to if you want to lay out those 2 tasks as we jump in.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting observation, and there are 2 tasks that we have in a kind of liberal deliberative democracies. And, it's interesting that great religious traditions, especially in recent century or so, have all been pretty much in favor of affirming democracy, thinking that that there's a value in folks embracing and bringing in their visions of the good life, their own vision of the good life within the public sphere, or embracing them as a community. But religious traditions have had more difficulty with a kind of pluralistic side of democracy. That is to say, allowing everybody else, not just their own co-religionists, to have equal voice in the public domain. Now, American experiment was predicated precisely on such equal voice idea. And I think this present day situation, we seem to be almost finding it hard to sustain that. And presidential debate, the first presidential debate in this electoral cycle, seemed to be just an indication of something like that.
So, Matt, what difference does it make to have that distinction on the table when you're looking at the debate? Why do you think it matters?
Well, I think for one, we've already started doing it a little bit. It's really easy for us to slip into sort of passive voice and talk generally about sort of what's happening in our context, and not talk about the role of particular players. So there's been this conversation, I think ever since Charlottesville, of sort of concern about sort of both siderism or something like that, right? Where we want to say, we want to try to remain neutral in some sort of way in the public discourse. We want to say, oh, well, we can see this sort of happening on both sides. Whatever bad thing is, whatever bad behavior we're talking about, we want to say we can see it on both sides. But I wonder if making this distinction might actually help us sort of see that, like, at least on Tuesday night, it struck me that while it's true that both sides were, through the cacophony, trying to sort of commend their vision of life together in America, so there's symmetry there on that first task that Miroslav describes, or on that task of sort of commending one's vision of life. But on this maintenance of the possibilities of pluralistic discourse, on that task, I think there was total asymmetry, right? It seemed like Vice President Biden came in prepared for to have a debate, and President Trump came in prepared to try to prevent a debate from happening. Oh, it's not just that, like, we have norms that are slipping, but there's a particular agency on the part of one particular actor, one particular vision that is contending among the others. In this case, I think what I called Trumpism earlier. That vision actually is acting differently with respect to this, its concerns, its ability to contribute to the maintenance of the possibility of the public square.
So maybe one way to express that might be that one of the visions that is contending does not have as substantive value honoring of every person, whoever that person might be, qua human being, and does not have high regard for truth, does not honor truth, whether the truth might be for you or against you, or for me or against me. But truth is something that is also, allegiance to truth is something that's also a substantive good. And that's what seemed to me to be kind of systematically being practically eroded. I mean, on the one hand, you have constant bemoaning of fake news, and that might imply that something that isn't fake, something that's true, is really valuable. But at the same time, you have practical undermining of any being held responsible to truth that one speaks, or acting truthfully in one's own life and in public.
I think Trump, a really big part of the substance of whatever his vision of flourishing life is winning, right? The thing is, winning isn't just the same thing no matter how you contextualize it. It's a really different sort of thing to value winning in something like a brawl versus value winning in something like a sports game. Because in the former case, there's not like concern for the brawl as such, right? The system in which it's happening doesn't matter. The value is simply to dominate. Whereas in the game, it's only kind of within the bounds that winning is valued. It's set. It depends on the context of the game for its meaning and significance. It's not just a matter of sheer dominance. It's a matter of kind of winning this type of activity. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think it really does, and it makes me think of not just like any old sort of game, right? I think in an American context, when we think about sports, we immediately think about professional sports, where there's sort of there's a referee, right, who represents some sort of regime of power that is sort of outside the game, making the game possible. To take that responsibility for the game itself off the players, and then there's this like sort of external regime that norms the game, and then the players are only worried about sort of winning within the confines of what's sort of established by some, again, sort of external power. And we could propose that the debate moderator ought to have been that, but it's clear from Tuesday night that's not nobody has that power. And I take it that in the case of public discourse, it's maybe a little bit more like a pickup game, right? We're not talking about an NBA basketball game. We're talking about the pickup game that happens down at the neighborhood court, at least not in non-COVID times. And in that game, each of us actually plays exactly these sorts of dual roles these two roles that Miroslav talks about. We're both playing on our teams, trying to win, as it were. But we're calling our own fouls. We're actually responsible for the conditions of the game itself. We're the only ones. It's the players on the field, on the court, who keep the game from becoming a brawl. And that I think it's that sort of dual responsibility that seems that we're sort of losing sight of, and any sort of like blaming of the moderator, right, is sort of actually fundamentally misunderstanding the more cooperative nature of the game, as it were, that we're playing together, that we all actually have to share responsibility together for maintaining this game, so that it provides any meaningful context in which we can contend for the very truth of our lives and our shared life together.
Yeah, I think that's a very useful metaphor of game, and makes it vivid in terms of why procedures matter, because the games cannot be played if they're not honored. I was wondering whether also in democratic politics, of what does winning consist, and it may be more in kind of electoral situations in which we find ourselves right now. Something like the game and winning is what we can expect following those kinds of rules. But I'm wondering whether more generally, the winning in the game has almost one wins, another one loses, and maybe certain skills are gained in the process. But in democratic game, I think I would really hope for something like deliberative democracies, where the win consists also of having learned something from the other person. So kind of adjustment of perspectives and adjustment of one's life in light of perspective by others seem to be also an essential component of democratic way of life, if you want to put it this way. And this is also what in many ways we seem to be increasingly unable to do.
And that brings us back to truth, as you pointed us to earlier, right? Because it seems like if we are together, maybe this is a cooperative game.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Yeah,
we're together contending for some shared good. But in that case, the shared good, I take it, is the truth of our life together, right? And so that truth, so that this sort of lack of commitment to truth actually undermines the game in two respects. First of all, there's the sort of truth, recourse to shared facts, a sort of shared understanding of the world as it is. That's a condition of the possibility of our contending with one another, right? So it sort of takes away the possibility of the discourse. But even more fundamentally, if we lose sight of truth, we've lost actually the target at which this collaborative game is aimed at to begin with.
I agree with that. I think there's some shared goal that has to be also related to what is true in this broad sense of truth for human beings, that has to be always in play. And so if we lose that, we're almost losing the very purpose of why we engage in the process in the first place.
I like all of this. It feels a little idealized to me right now. Like, I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine kind of what the shared project has been. Maybe it's Trump vision of winning isn't totally out of the blue, but has been the norm for quite a while. Certainly seems like Mitch McConnell's sort of approach to the world, right? There's nothing deliberative about the Senate since McConnell took over as majority leader. But yeah, I wonder, like, how do you live in a context where you wish that there were some sort of shared project that was truth-seeking and discerning, but what you have is not that?
So how do you sustain a certain kind of political culture in which...
Well, sustain is probably... How do you move towards it from something that is manifestly not that?
That's right. So restore back to it, or, but at any rate, that might be still. You're suggesting that will be still a kind of a desirable thing. That's where we should try to move, and unless we retrieve it in some ways, the democracy itself, and not just certain substantive values that we have been endangered. Would you go so far?
Yeah. No, I think that captures for me precisely one of the big feelings of this political moment.
And I wonder, there's been polling on this, right? That's really troubling over the last few years, right? Younger people are less and less inclined to tell pollsters that it's really, really important to them that they live in a democracy. Mm. Authoritarianism, especially if the authority is imagined as someone who maybe wants what you want, doesn't sound all that unappealing to young people these days. And I wonder if that's a sign that it's not just Trumpism. Maybe Trumpism is uniquely unable to contribute to the maintenance of our shared of this sort of shared discourse together. But it might be that all of us have fallen short in at least articulating what reasons our visions have for, like, what goods there actually are in maintaining the discourse itself. That if our discourse is only ever sort of talking about what we could win, what we could gain, what really good policy goals we might be able to achieve, but if we're not articulating from within our political visions, within our theological visions, the sorts of values that the game, as it were, itself has. If we're not talking about those sorts of, that second set of values, Miroslav, that you were talking about, the value of every interlocutor, the value of the truth by which and for which we contend, it may be that we actually have to remind ourselves and one another about the ways that whatever vision of life we are invested in, there are, I think for most of us, at Miroslav, as you suggest in Flourishing, each at least of the world religions has resources to do precisely this. Our visions of life in which we're invested have resources to actually be able to describe the good, not just of the game if we can win it, but of the game itself, of the discourse itself, of this shared project of democratic life together.
Yeah, and it is a value of certain form of being a human being. The fact that truth matters to me. I was just recently reading Seneca, and I came across his claim that the virtue doesn't need adornment because it is its own greatest ornament and kind of sanctifies the bodies in which it resides. And it struck me such a strange and foreign idea where we kind of embrace the beauty of virtue. And it seems to me that something like this would need to be retrieved as well. That it's not just that we value as kind of democratic practices, but those democratic practices are expressions of our deep humanity, and I think that's where the classical world religions come in, which is what the claim that they would make. They're not making claims about having resources for deliberative democracy. They're making claims about nature of our humanity, and that gives us resources for deliberative democracy.
And what's great about that is that then makes our commitment to liberal democratic values a commitment that's actually much deeper, because it's not just a sort of political philosophy, but it's actually integrated as part of our vision of what it means to live lives worthy of our humanity.
We've been talking about this kind of abstracted, at least from where we stand a little bit, or maybe invested as Americans. I wonder if we might do a little talking, think a little bit about how does it work as Christians, as followers of Jesus, which quite a large number of people who are involved in this particular country's electoral politics right now, and quite a few of people who are drawn towards some features of the substantive vision that they see President Trump championing. So how do you do it as Christians? What are those kind of deep Christian commitments that wind up cohering well with commitment to democratic values and deliberative democratic discourse? Why should a Christian care about the rules of this particular game?
You might say because a Christian cares for the salvation of their soul. That will be in line with what I was trying to say earlier. Whether I honor another person, and if I'm in a debate, I am willing actually to hear what they're saying and then respond to what they're saying, or do I just want to throw at them barrage of insults, false assertions, and interruptions? I mean, that seems to me kind of the basic question of, do I actually honor that person who is standing with me, or who is facing me, and who is speaking to me? And so it can be said also for truthfulness, and so it can be said for a number of other virtues that are necessary. Certain kind of courage also, not to align oneself with a particular group to which one belongs. But my sense is that commitment to Christ, commitment to God, has in many places in many ways taking second place to commitment to winning a particular game in national politics.
But what if you see your winning as somehow advancing the interests of God, right? As moving society towards a really important sort of righteousness or something like that?
Well, I think that would be the central issue, whether ways in which you move your society toward righteousness are extraneous to the righteousness itself, or do we have a substantive commitment to certain forms of relating to others, irrespective of their goals with which we might not agree, so that we as Christians tend to think all means are open to us, but as long as we can achieve certain kinds of goals. And that seems to me a radically unchristian position.
Yeah, it strikes me that just the basic commitment here is to love one's neighbor, and obviously we could think that loving our neighbor means allowing them to live in a world that would be much more just because we have had our way. Mm-hmm. But there, I'm sort of drawn to think about like Luke Bretherton's work, Christ in the Common Life, and some of his earlier writings that talk about just how central of a Christian practice he says listening is. And Miroslav, you've already sort of been talking in this direction, but just to make it that much more concrete, Luke really leans into listening as a Christian practice. as a sort of embodiment of a certain sort of Christian virtue, an embodiment, I take it, of the Christian love of neighbor. And it may be that those things. Well, I wonder whether some of the reasoning about the nature of public discourse would even help us in our Christian, in thinking about our Christian commitments, to think, well, the commitment to listen, the commitment to sort of invest in a shared project together is logically prior to, it is, as we are inclined to say from time to time, a condition of the possibility of any number of the other sorts of goods that we might want for ourselves and for our neighbors and for our country and for the world. If so, then and I think you've at least persuaded me, Miroslav, in your writings, then we would have reason to prioritize these sorts of practices of recognition of the humanity of the other, and these practices of love of neighbor that look sometimes as pedestrian, but deeply powerful and rare, as genuinely listening to another person, hearing their experience, understanding their own quest for the truth.
I wonder, that seems to point in the direction of debate being just fundamentally the wrong paradigm under which to think what we should be after as Christians in our public life, because a debate is kind of by definition a form where you listen only so as to rebut, rather than so as to grow in wisdom.
Well, that depends on how you think about the debate, right? In what larger frame the debate might be set, right? Debate becomes that if the only good of the debate is winning the debate. But debate, it's set in a broader context where debate is actually is precisely an artificial sort of conversation that we engage in for the sake of getting closer to the truth of the matter, to the facts of the matter. Then I think we might see it differently.
I think Chesterton sometimes said that you shouldn't allow a quarrel to spoil a good argument. So it would require the very good and intense argument in terms of a debate should not devolve into a brawl that we have witnessed. Earlier we talked about as if Trumpism is the source of our maladies, and I think to a degree that is true, but is it a consequence also of our maladies, of our cultural maladies? So that especially as Christians, we ought not simply think about how do we intervene in a particular point where we are in the electoral cycle, although I think the situation is fairly critical. But also, how do we think more generally about sustaining and retrieving certain cultural values that become shared values and that make then the kind of politics you were referring to, and to Matt, we were discussing all three of us possible.
So I think it's fairly clear that the Trump phenomenon didn't come out of nowhere, and there are important antecedents to it. So it is a consequence, but it's a catalyzing consequence, and one that at some level makes it a lot harder to change course. It's set us on a particular path in a way that maybe wasn't so clear a few years back. So I agree. There's got to be some sort of seeking after a deeper conversion away from whatever sort of malformations of our public habits have led to this point. But I wouldn't want to make that claim in too strong a both sides sort of way. I do think that there's a history of kind of identifiable bad faith actors who have pushed us in this direction.
Yeah, and I take what you're saying, and agree with it. We can't think of this in terms of both and kind of equivalences. We have to make discerning judgment from case to case. I was wondering whether you would also think that this is particularly, in the behavior of the president, this is particularly egregious form of what one could observe as cultural habits developing in social media and elsewhere as well. Do you think it may have the effect of awakening us into self-realization? We look at ourselves almost in the mirror of this, and we say, "Wow, we can't allow this to be our common life."
I mean, that might be a hope. But looking at myself, my fear is that just as likely what it does is it drags us into the maelstrom, where the feeling of being in a situation where the rules of the game are not respected, where the value of the framework within which we might contend and discern together is not recognized by one of the sides. People refer back sometimes kind of derisively towards to Michelle Obama's "when they go low, we go high" speech. I certainly feel the temptation to go low. So the gloves are off. Like, why am I still wearing gloves, right?
Yeah, no, the temptation is there. But I must say that for myself, I might not behave always the way I want to behave on social media, but seeing what's happening in social media, actually seeing reactions to some of my posts, I've decided I have to, before I post, I have to ask the question: how does it contribute to the peace that Christ came to bring? And it was being kind of almost scared into becoming acting in a way to flee from what I could become if I continue on that path.
I think we can have hope here. We should pray here for exactly, I think, this sort of response. But it may also be that we should be, I think, honest at the same time, that there's something real about having not just a bad actor or some bad actors, but we have a particular structure to our government where the president has unequaled power, at least among any other. There's no other individual with that sort of power within our government, and it's a particular challenge to our politics and to our shared life together, to have the person who holds that office wielding the power of that office and wielding the power of that person's platform against the very norms that make that position possible. I mean, it struck me again thinking about what we're seeing happen, that there's the old saying, the old adage about be careful not to saw off the limb that you're sitting on. It strikes me that what Trump's doing may exhibit exactly that sort of folly, but it's even more dangerous because he is sawing off the trunk from which come the limbs that all of us are, the various limbs that all of us are sitting on. And I think, to my mind, I wonder whether we need to just continue. I really appreciated what Vice President Biden said about just turning back to the vote and reminding us that we do live in a democratic society. We do have a vote coming. And in a certain way, I wonder whether, to pick up the analogy of the game again, whether we just need to keep playing the game, keep calling our own fouls, keep doing the work that you have to do in a pickup game to make sure that the game keeps going, and with hope that at some point, the norms of the game will win out.
May it be so.
Yeah, I think we should do everything we can not to stop stop playing this game, right? Because there may be interests also in undermining the very character of the game itself. And we have tendencies, not just in this country, but across the world, in that direction. And I think good active participation in voting is central for us to push against that.
Well, thank you guys both for the conversation.
Yeah, thanks. I enjoyed it very much, and I think it's really important for us to continue talking about that very issue.
Thanks for the conversation, friends.
For the Life of the World is a production of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture at Yale Divinity School. This episode featured Miroslav Volf, Ryan McAnnally-Linz, and Matt Croasmun. I'm Evan Rosa, and I edited and produced the show. For more information, visit us online at faith.yale.edu. New episodes drop every Saturday, and you can subscribe through any podcast app. We hope you'll consider supporting us today as well. 3 ways that you can do that are: first, to share the show with a friend by text or email. Second, you could post on your social feed. Or third, you could open up Apple Podcasts right now, right here after listening, and leave a review and a rating of the show. Now, we're asking you to share and support the show because we really enjoy delivering this to you every week. And we hope that it's some way to maintain human connection at a time that is increasingly important, when the very fabric of our discourse and society is under threat. We were not meant to live at distance from one another. We hope this show is just a small, consistent way you can keep connecting and keep growing and keep thinking and seeking a life that is worthy of our shared humanity. So we'll be back with more this coming week. Thanks for listening.